All right, I think we are on, which is great. Very good. Hi, welcome everyone to this live crisis management, migration and internal security EPSO exam briefing webcast. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this event where I'm very happy to share all the information that is at our disposal, everything that we know about this particular competition that EPSO, the European Personnel Selection Office, has just launched. With that, let me do a quick tech check to be sure that everything works fine. So why don't you type into the chat box which country and which city you're dialing in from. That would be lovely to have that. We can see there's already from someone from Strasbourg in France, Croatia, Brussels, Portugal, Netherlands, Brussels, Italy, Eritrea. Wow, probably that's the furthest away. And all sorts of other wonderful places. Many of you might be already on holiday or on workation and other words that describe this hybrid world that we're living in. And I myself, currently, I'm in Hungary, so we don't do the live video production, but we do the live event because we want to be sure that you are briefed and you are presented with the latest information right after the competition has been launched. So with that, my name is András Baneth, and we are going to look at this wonderful opportunity, crisis management, migration, and internal security, which is one-of-a-kind competition. I don't particularly remember when the last similar topic was launched, but certainly a long time ago. So if it doesn't come to me right off the bat, it probably means that this kind of this topic and this policy area or these policy areas have not been on EPSO's radar for a good long time, which means that all of you who are in this field are certainly very motivated and very much into securing this opportunity and securing a permanent EU job. And the road to that leads through passing this particular competition run by EPSO. So with that, very good. A couple of housekeeping points. You might know my background. I'm a former EU official, and I've been dealing with EU careers for 15 years, perhaps even longer, with different hats and through different tools and media, with the Ultimate EU Testbook and EU Training as a website and different services. About our company, very briefly, so we have a really robust, wonderful community of EU career enthusiasts and those who are keen to secure a permanent EU job. And we are very proud to have helped thousands and thousands of candidates do that, meaning they have passed the EPSO competition and now they are working for one of the EU institutions in Brussels and Luxembourg and way beyond. There's a pretty robust community as well on Facebook. If you are there, make sure to join that. I'll mention that in the end. But there is a dedicated group for this particular or these two competitions, which is one competition, but with two very specific profiles that we're going to get into. So be sure that you join that and you can share news and rumors and exam preparation ideas. There are a lot of draft packages that are at your disposal, thousands of questions. We also have a dedicated cohort, the dedicated questions that help you prepare specifically for these topics. So you can practice the knowledge part of this competition, not just the other components that I'm going to walk you through systematically in the next couple of minutes. We have lots of webinars, methodology, and others. And in the end of today's presentation, there's going to be a special live exclusive offer that's going to be valid for about 2 days. So you can take advantage of all the things that we put out there and things that can help your preparation and help you succeed in this particular competition. So having said that, one word that this competition, if I'm not mistaken, this is number 3 in the row, in the sequence of the so-called new competition process. EPSO had a certain system in place since 2010, 2011, 2010, which was changed not so radically, but still quite substantively in 2023, this year. And the new system was launched in June this year, so little more than 5-6 weeks ago. And this is the third competition that they launched under this new heading, which means that certain changes have been implemented. And if you had taken any EPSO competition in the past, be sure that you understand the differences compared to the system that you had known, and be sure that you understand what are the changes that this particular competition has introduced. So with that, let me quickly walk you through the idea and the new process, where the aim is really to simplify, to streamline, and to speed it up. Under this banner of more efficient and quicker competitions, they have removed the so-called assessment center. There's no more assessment center that is part of the selection procedure. And one important word, actually two important things. One is a distinction that I always make in terminology. We are talking about selection. We're not talking about recruitment. So EPSO, as the name suggests, is the European Personnel Selection Office. They do not deal with recruitment, which is done by the individual directors general, or more specifically units, within all the EU institutions that can hire a laureate, a successful candidate, a laureate from the reserve list. So EPSO only focuses on selecting the candidates and creating the reserve list in that process. And the point number two I wanted to make is a disclaimer, which is our kind of legal footnote to say that whatever I tell you is certainly to the best of our knowledge, and we try to be as accurate as humanly possible, but we are not the official source of information. We're not EPSO. It's only the Personnel Selection Office, and more specifically, the selection board that can make decisions, that can guide you or give you official answers on certain unique questions and unique situations. And definitely, the notice of competition is the official source of all the information. Now, having said that, and that's out of the way, let's look at the new process, where it is indeed streamlined, it is indeed more efficient. You submit an application after filling out all the forms that were required online on EPSO's website, the candidate profile. And at one point, you need to upload the supporting documents, which is possible to do a little later than the exam application deadline. So if you don't have all the official documents, or if you need a translation, you need some sort of formal approval, or from former employers, you need to get some documents because of employment certificate or description of the duties that you perform. In that case, that deadline is a little bit pushed back, but those documents need to be uploaded, and they will not be checked at that point, only later in the process, but you need to have them uploaded in the system. Once all of this is done and the administrative, the bureaucratic part is done, that's when the actual exam happens. And we're going to talk briefly about the expected timeline, but this is likely going to be around October 2023, October, November. We need to see how exactly the organization, the planning process happens. But it gives you a rough idea when or by when you need to be fully prepared to sit those competitions. Very important point, all of this is done remotely and on your own computer, which is, again, something we're going to come back to be sure that you have administrator rights to that particular computer, because if it's a work computer, chances are you do not have that level of access to your very own device. But for the sake of the competition, you need to use that or get hold of a computer where you can install a certain app or a certain software so that you can sit the competition, because all of this is done remotely and all of this is done in a single day, in a single sitting. What are the exams? Pretty straightforward. Essentially, there are three components. One is the so-called psychometric tests or computer-based tests. These are reasoning skills, so abstract, verbal, and numerical reasoning. Number two, field-related multiple choice questions or quiz, depending on how you want to interpret that Q. Point is, these are the knowledge-based tests where you effectively need to demonstrate your knowledge in the particular field of the competition, migration, internal security, what have you. And then there is part number three, which is a case study with a written assignment. It's relatively short and, very importantly, not related to your knowledge in the field of the competition. It might be framed in the context of the topic of the competition. So the issue may be around migration, internal security, or rather more nuanced parts of these policy areas, but you are not tested on what you know about this particular topic. What it tests is your written communication skills. And it's a relatively short written test, a relatively short case study. We are hearing that it's probably going to be 45 minutes long. So it's relatively short. It's not like an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's a pretty pointed exercise that tests your drafting skills in that particular language. And the language part is something I'm going to come back to. With that's when the eligibility check happens. So for those who pass these particular tests, and all of this is computer-based, remotely administered, once you get the result and that says, okay, you passed, that's when your eligibility, your documents, your formal declarations are actually verified. And then if all goes well, and why wouldn't it, that's when you are placed on the reserve list from which you can be hired, you can be recruited into a specific position in one of the EU institutions. So with that, let's look at the AD 403-23. So 403 is the reference number. And I think in web design, you have the 404 when the page is not found. Anyways, 403 also refers to some computer code. But for the purposes of our conversation today, this is the reference point, and that's what you need to search for and look for each time you may file an official question to the selection board, or you want to research certain additional information about this particular competition. Now let's take a look at this. What are your chances? How big, how significant is this particular competition? Well, it's pretty significant. So there are a lot of places on the reserve list. You have 168 places on the reserve list for crisis management, and then 118 places for migration and internal security. An important word of managing expectations and understanding what it means to be in the reserve list. It's a sufficient, or it's a necessary but insufficient precondition of employment. What do I mean by that? You need to be on the reserve list to be considered for hiring and to be hired for a permanent position, but it's not a guarantee of employment. You need to pass the competition, be there, and then perhaps you need to do extra steps. Dare I say lobbying, dare I say trying to find vacancies and apply for specific positions proactively, or you can be invited by heads of unit who look at the database and say, well, this person's profile, given their linguistic skills, given their experience, given a host of other factors, they seem to have the right profile. And then there's a job interview, or they might even subject you to some minor tests on top of what the selection process had required of you. But in that part of the process, it's no longer considered to be part of the selection. That's entirely up to the hiring manager or the head of unit or the director general that wants to hire you. That is to say, this is an extremely important phase, extremely important achievement to be in the reserve list. Yet there's one more hurdle to jump over. And we do have a webinar that I had done some time ago. We might update that soon, which is about how to get a job once you are on the reserve list. And happy to share ideas, happy to share best practices and advice if that can be helpful. So with that, let's take a look at a couple of practical implications, practical questions. First one is where are you going to work once you are hired? Well, typically Brussels or Luxembourg, depending on which institution or which director general within, say, the European Commission would want to hire you, because they have offices, they have presence in essentially Brussels and Luxembourg. Strasbourg, not really. Even if that's the official seat of the European Parliament, you are almost certainly not going to be hired there. One additional place of work, or it's not one place, but one additional comment in regards to where you're going to work, you might end up working at one of the EU delegations. So the EU's offices anywhere around the world, which are accredited in countries outside of the EU, or it's accredited to international organizations like the UN, perhaps in Geneva or New York or other places. And again, it's not specifically underlined or pronounced that you would immediately be placed there, but given the way EU jobs and the place of work is organized, and given the very nature of the topics we are covering today, crisis management, migration, internal security, that is somewhere in the package that one of the delegations might want to take advantage of your expertise in these particular fields. In terms of institutions, pretty straightforward. All the EU institutions and even some agencies or as the External Action Service, legally speaking, that's not an institution, it's a service. So they can be clients, they can be employers based on this particular competition, and they can hire candidates from the reserve list once the competition has concluded. And then what will you do? Well, there is a pretty diverse range of duties in the notice of competition, and many of these are not exhaustive lists. These are examples and orientation words and orientation to what sort of job profile can you expect. But again, given the nature of the task and given the nature of these extremely complex policy areas, they cannot give you that fully exhaustive list. But it gives you a rough idea that the typical duties are listed in Annex 2 of the Notice of Competition. And just for the sake of example, without any desire to be comprehensive, say in the European Parliament, and it comes to crisis management, supporting the creation of systems and backup methods for comms amongst members of the crisis management team. So helping the crisis management team do their job, or in the European Commission, designing, evaluating professional training and exercises for emergency responders. And there's a whole range of other duties and tasks, whether it's crisis management, migration, or the internal security, or in the EAS, the External Action Service, providing support in ensuring the use duty of care for the security of staff based in delegations. But this is the kind of job that would typically happen in HQ at the headquarters in Brussels. So again, with migration, maybe just one more, assisting, coordination, operational policy, funding, legal issues related to migration and internal security, which is a very, very broad concept, a very, very broad set of duties that can be turned into something more nuanced and more practical. Liaising with international organizations in migration, asylum, and so on. And then also, interestingly, the Council of Ministers. So the Council's own secretariat is a potential employer, which is in terms of employment not a huge client, or not a huge taker of EU job candidates, given the way the Council of Ministers, the Council of the EU, operates. That the Secretariat itself is a pretty lean organization, only with a couple of thousand staff, perhaps around 2,000-ish. I might be wrong there, but it gives you roughly the scale of how many staff there is compared to the European Commission, which has roughly 35,000 staff, including permanent and temporary and contract agents as well. So anyways, the Council as well is also a taker for migration and internal security experts, internal security EU staff, and to help them on these particular policy areas. So the next part is perhaps the most practical and the most consequential part, which is to decide whether you're eligible for this particular job profile, and are you eligible for this particular competition? Are you going to be taken in? Are you going to be found to qualify to sit the various steps of this particular competition? To decide that, there are a couple of general requirements and a couple of more specific requirements, including language and including your background, your degrees or qualifications and work experience. So let's take a look at the general requirements. Pretty straightforward. As in every case, there is an EU citizenship requirement. You need to be citizen of the EU 27, one of the countries. You need to have fulfilled your military service if that is compulsory in your country. Or if it's not compulsory, then you're not concerned by this. But again, this need not be an issue for you to take part in the competition, and it cannot be kind of hanging there in your particular profile that you might be called into military service if you haven't completed that or you have not been exempted. And then you need to meet the character requirements, which essentially refers to criminal track record or other issues with law enforcement or with the criminal justice system. And you might be required to present that as a certain certificate to that effect to be sure that you can prove this. And then there are just more tricky specific requirements. One is the language part, which is not that tricky, but then comes the work experience and the qualifications or degrees, which can sometimes be a bit more tricky. Let's take a look at the languages. The languages are pretty straightforward because you need to know at least 2 languages, but let's look at the details, what that actually means. You need to know, and that essentially means speaking, writing and understanding 2 official EU languages. That is not linked to your passport. You can pick any 2 EU languages that are official among the 24 official EU languages. And is decoupled from your passport. So me as a Hungarian and a Belgian citizen, well, I could pick Latvian and Romanian, though that wouldn't meet the criteria that I'm going to present to you right now. But my point is, no matter what your citizenship, what your passport, or what's your permanent residency is, the 2 languages are up to you. What these 2 could be are somewhat limited, or they have certain consequences to it. So the first one is language 1, which they don't call actually language 1, but it's just specified as such, that the computer-based tests, meaning the abstract verbal numerical reasoning test, they need to be in one of the EU's 24 official languages, except English. You cannot pick English for the abstract verbal numerical reasoning test. It really doesn't matter much that what the language is, except for the verbal reasoning. Okay, for numerical reasoning, you might argue that certain expressions are different in some languages, but it's not that difficult to quickly process information in other languages, except for verbal reasoning. For verbal reasoning, the language is an extremely important aspect. So be sure that you pick a language in which you can understand and process information really quickly. So if that is French, if that is Spanish, if that is Czech, if that is Bulgarian, no matter which one it is, but be sure you pick a language that you can quickly read and understand text and answer the questions. And then when it comes to the field-related multiple choice questions, so whether you picked crisis management, then it's going to be on crisis management. Whether it's crisis management and migration, it's going to be on those topics. If it's internal security, then it's internal security, but that is going to be in English, full stop. So that must be in English. You don't have any choice there. So regardless of your pick in for the abstract verbal numerical reasoning test, you must choose English for this part and the case study as well. You need to draft the case study, the written test, in English. So your English drafting skills need to be up to the job and on a level that proves your competencies in that particular exercise. What about qualifications? And I know that there are a lot of questions coming in, so I'll take a quick look at those. I'll pause for a second and try to catch up on the incoming questions. But let me just cover this part with qualifications. This is an 87 competition. What does that mean? That means the entry level for administrators, so the policy officers and administrators who are working on decision-making, policy-making, financial issues. 87 is already a more advanced level. Typically, that requires 3 + 3 years of experience inside or outside institutions. So to be an 87, you need to have at least 6 years of experience, but we're going to take a look at the more nuanced rules there. So what are these qualifications that are needed? Well, you need to have 3 years of university qualifications, so equivalent of completed 3 years of university studies, plus a minimum of 7 years of relevant professional experience. And that's important that it's relevant, right? Like you cannot be waiting tables as a summer job, but it has to be, well, you could have done that as long as you still have 7 years of relevant professional experience. So that's one scenario, one way of proving your eligibility for the competition. Scenario number 2, you could have 4 years of university diploma plus a minimum of 6 years relevant professional experience, right? So that is an alternative scenario. So if you have a master's degree, chances are you have completed 4 years, in which case you need the 6 years of work experience, at least 6 years. And then the actual nuances and the particular details are in the notice of competition. But one important point I want to mention here is that the university degree is not limited. So they don't say it needs to happen in migration studies or law or economics or molecular biology. It's 3 years or 4 years of university degree. And then based on that, whether it's 7 or 6 years of experience. And then, well, the professional experience is really important. Where did you acquire that? And the rule is that it needs to have been acquired in one or more areas listed in the notice of competition. So for that to be relevant, it needs to have a certain connection to those areas, and it has to be related to one or more activities as listed in the notice of competition. So there are certain areas of study or areas of experience, and then particular activities is something that you need to have done in your past to qualify for the competition. So for all of this, check the details of the notice of competition, and I'm pretty certain that there's going to be an infinite number of permutations as to your background, your experience, particular areas, activities. So there is probably a lot of assessment or evaluation or judgment that needs to be made by the selection board to say, well, does this person qualify? Do we consider that they are eligible for this particular competition? And a couple of examples just to take a look. So area of experience could be humanitarian crisis response, which again is a huge area, as all of you in this particular field would know. And in terms of activity, operational activity. So that means you may not be just purely a researcher in this particular area without having completed, having performed certain operational activities in this particular field. And then again, to the same degree, area of experience, prevention, preparedness, response to disasters, activity being coordination, negotiation, representation, liaison in those particular fields. So you need to have that hands-on experience and not just be a studious researcher or someone who may have been a journalist perhaps in those areas, but you need to have done specific actions, specific activities. Let me pause here for a second before I say a couple of words on why this is a great opportunity and pick a few questions which I see are awaiting me. So here's one that says, can you also put a third language in the app? Does training count, or they are not seen as relevant experience? Now, as far as I know, in the application questionnaire, you can insert a third language, but it's not going to be relevant for scoring. It's not going to be relevant for any sort of evaluation of your profile. It might be considered at the point of employment. Once you are on the reserve list and they're looking at your profile, they might say, oh, this person speaks Arabic, this person speaks Russian, this person speaks whatever language. That might be a piece of information that they consider, but it's not something that you need to be concerned by at this point. Once you are on the reserve list, your profile, your CV, you can update that, you can insert those pieces of information. Once you have completed all the formal criteria, passed the exam, you were found eligible, etc., then you can insert that information. Here's another one on supporting documents beyond diplomas and contracts, how to prove all the specific duties someone claims to have had. What type of proof is requested for supporting documents? Yeah, I probably would not want to say something that may not be legally fully accurate. So I have certain ideas that declaration on honor or certain declarations from former employers where they would list certain duties might qualify, but this is something that only the selection board can decide. So if you are uncertain or you don't have, let's say, formal hard documents on something, be sure to ask them and ask them, what would this particular format, or would this particular, with a letterhead and an official signature or with a stamp or whatever formal proof you can create, certainly fully truthful and fully accurate and fully ethical, ask them whether that's something that they would consider as a proof for this particular issue. So that seems to be the right approach to be sure that you are not caught off guard. One more question before I move on. The multiple choice quiz, so the tests on your knowledge in this particular field, that seems to be very central to this new format, since the other tests only require a pass mark. Do you confirm? Yes, the short answer is yes, because the knowledge-based tests have grown in significance for these particular specialist competitions. The other parts are obviously important because you don't want to fail for not reaching the pass mark. And for all of you who may think, what is a pass mark? I'm going to get to that in a second. But enough said, at this point, the multiple choice quiz, the knowledge-based part, has grown in relative importance in this particular competition. Why is it a great opportunity? Let's go back to our slides. Well, there are great benefits, and you certainly are aware of some of these or all of these. You get great health insurance. You get to access European schools if you have kids. It's an education according to the curriculum of your country of origin, as long as it's an EU country. Attractive salaries. So that is certainly a big draw, aside from working on consequential important policy areas and issues. We actually have a salary calculator, a simulator on our website. So we took the liberty to do a simulation based on these factors. Some of this you can change, so you can find a more suitable simulation, a more accurate number. But what does it give? It gives 6,300 euro net per month, which is a pretty good salary, even in Brussels, even in Luxembourg, and then certainly other parts of the world, though there they do certain weighing and there are coefficients that they apply. But again, this is the estimated salary. If you have kids, that it can go even further higher up. Let's take a look at the exam, the very specific competition phases, what that actually entails, what are the exams that you are required to pass. Well, there's the application process. As we said, it's a pretty straightforward administrative exercise. You submit your application. You can use any of the 24 official EU languages. Maybe for ease of use or simplicity, you might want to choose English, French, or German, or Italian and Spanish. But then again, you're entirely free to choose any of the 24. And then upload the supporting documents directly into your EPSO account. Make sure to apply before the deadline, 5th of September, Brussels times, because if you are in a different time zone, you might get into trouble. And even in the last moment, there could be server issues, there could be other challenges. Be sure to apply way in advance soon as your vacation is over, or right now, whenever you get a chance, please, I encourage you to go ahead. Upload the supporting documents by 12 October, which is a big help because you can get those documents by that time. So you don't need to rush, and in the middle of August, where most people are traveling or on holiday or on not as intense work mode, it might be difficult to get certain proof points or documents into the system. So that's why they pushed it back, that you have a bit later to upload those documents, but by all means, you need to upload by then. And as I said, it's not going to be immediately checked, but you no longer will have the chance to replace a document or add that into it. And I'm wondering in which language these need to be. Well, ideally English, I'm guessing. And I'm guessing because I don't know whether they require you to have everything translated by then, which probably would complicate things to a great extent. And anyways, maybe it's just for simplicity. But if I think about the logic, the way the institutions operate and the legal framework in which they operate, you can probably submit those documents in any of the 24 official languages of the EU, because these are about employment, work history, degrees, diplomas, and all 24 official languages should be and probably will be accepted for the supporting documents. So that was a quick brainstorming all by myself to as I was wondering out loud which language it is, but I'm pretty sure that this can be in any of the official languages. Having said that, what are the actual tests that you need to pass? And as we had already seen, there aren't many, but these are really important and a sine qua non requirement condition for you to be placed on the reserve list. You have the computer-based test, the field-related test, and the case study. So let's take these one by one and see how they work. As we said before, these are always online, remotely procured, so remotely administered on your own computer, and it's on the same day. So you sit down and you basically go through all of these tests in one sitting, and you're done. And then you are waiting for the result and crossing your fingers or hoping for a positive piece of news. With that, a small commercial plug. We at Brussels at the Ambiorix Center have a wonderful studio, and we're actually creating a second one right there with secure internet and fast internet and silence and words of encouragement. So if you are not in possession of a computer that you can use for the sake of EPSO tests, feel free to reach out, and you can come by, and it has a small fee, but you can come by to sit the exams in an environment or on a computer that meet all the criteria. So it's called the Ambiorix Center, and I think my colleagues are just going to put the link right there as they just did. Thank you so much. So with that, computer-based tests, what are these? Well, as we said earlier, any of the 24 official languages, but not English. And very importantly, it's pass or fail. You don't need to be among the top scoring, top percentile of candidates. You, and I'm using air quotes, only need to pass. What is the pass mark? Well, we're going to see that in a second. Essentially, you have the verbal, numerical, and abstract reasoning, but the pass mark has a bit of computation to it. It's not passing each and every one of them separately at a 50% point, but we're going to see what the formula is. Let's take a look what these tests are. I'm assuming many, if not most of you, would already know the famous, infamous verbal reasoning, 20 questions, 35 minutes, where there's a text passage and there's a question and there are statements, usually 4 statements, and you need to pick the correct answer. There's only one correct answer. There's no deduction for wrong answers, and there's only one correct answer, and it's quite straightforward. Numerical reasoning, there's a chart, there's a table, 10 questions and 20 minutes. So you need to interpret the data, you need to do some reasoning, estimation, and then calculation in the end. If you can estimate or guesstimate the correct answer, that certainly saves you time. And then the last bit is the abstract reasoning, where you have 10 questions and 10 minutes. That tends to be the most challenging for most candidates, given time pressure and given the complexity of this particular exercise. And that's it, pretty much. That's it for the computer-based tests, where you have the pass-fail. So I mentioned that the scoring has its own computation, its own logic for this competition, which means that for verbal reasoning, straightforward, you need to have at least 10 points out of 20. That's clear. For the numerical and the abstract reasoning, they decided to combine the pass mark or combine the score. So you need to have 10 points out of 20 to pass. That makes life a little easier, especially for those who are not so keen on abstract reasoning. If you get 10 points on abstract reasoning and 0 on numerical, you can still pass. And also the other way around, if you get 10 points on numerical and 0 on abstract, you can still pass. Given the number of candidates, you don't want to risk this. So you want to be absolutely sure that you pass this hurdle, which is not the most difficult one, but a very important one, because if you do not reach the pass mark, you're not going to be, your exam is not going to be evaluated for the multiple choice quiz and the case study. You're not going to know that immediately. It's not that you sit the test and they immediately tell you, well, too bad, you just failed, or you don't even need to take the multiple choice quiz or the case study. That's something that they will evaluate afterwards. So you need to complete all 3 building blocks or large building blocks. And the part of the first one, you have these 3 components. You need to sit all those, but this needs to be, you need to pass in order to have your scores taken into account for the other 2. And then this is what I just covered. And then field related. So let's take a look at the specific field related multiple choice question, which is interesting only, and I say that as someone who's been following this field for quite some time. It's only 30 questions, and I think it's pretty difficult to make a ranking on the basis of 30 questions. There is a pass mark. It doesn't matter much because the candidates are going to be ranked according to their scores. So certainly everyone who has any chance of succeeding, they need to have passed the pass mark. But that's not the difficult part. The difficult part is to have a score like 25 or 27 or 23, depending on how others perform and how you perform compared to the others, where the cutoff mark is going to be established. You have 35 minutes, and these are strictly knowledge-based questions for the particular domain of the competition. And then there is language 2. This is done in language 2, which is English, right? So this is done all in English, and pass mark needs to be reached, but with the comments that I just shared with you, that for practical purposes, it doesn't matter much. You need to be among the highest scoring candidates. And this determines whether your case study is going to be scored. So as I said, you need to draft, you need to take that exam as well. But when it comes to the scoring, they're only going to take a look, they're only going to take into account the scoring of the case study for those who already passed and this particular component. So the case study, what do we know about it? Well, we have somewhat limited knowledge about it, but it doesn't mean we don't know anything about it. We certainly have certain ideas on what the case study is. It's a written exercise. Its sole focus is to evaluate your written communication skills. As I said, it could be around the topic linked to migration, internal security, crisis management, but it's not a knowledge-based test. It's not that you need to write an essay about the EU's crisis preparedness methods or approach. It is a written communication exercise for drafting skills. And we put here question mark on duration, though rumor has it that it's 45 minutes. So that is a semi-certain, if that's a word, semi-certain piece of information. 45 minutes is the likely time, but it might be 60. But again, it gives you a rough idea about the scale. Scoring is from 0 to 10, and the pass mark, the cutoff is at 5. So the aggregate result and the scoring from all of these should yield ultimately a reserve list, right? So that's when based on which a reserve list will be established. And abstract verbal numerical reasoning, multiple choice quiz in the field, and then case study. So if all goes well, and hopefully it does, you end up on the reserve list. Though actually, and let me mention this first, there is still a bit of formal part where they check your eligibility. So that's when the actual manual or computer assisted, but ultimately manual check happens, where they take a look at what you declared and what your documents support. So there's a tiny bit of risk there if something doesn't add up, or there are some pieces of information that may not hold water. But again, this is not a test. It's not an additional thing you must do at that point, but that's when they check all of these. And who is it done for? So it's for those who reach the pass mark for the field related, and you are among the highest scoring candidates. So you are basically at the doorstep of the reserve list, and this should not cause any trouble. But some candidates may not be able to prove all their declarations, and they may not be eligible to be placed on the reserve list. So that's the kind of the final hurdle you need to jump over. So with that, then there's the step 4, which is the reserve list. You are notified in your EPSO account. You put in a bottle of champagne because you're so close to getting an EU job. But as we said before, you need to still secure a concrete position. And EPSO candidates are given access to certain vacancies, so you can proactively apply. There's usually far more. So there are more opportunities at the institutions than what is communicated to EPSO candidates. So there are larger databases of vacancies or internal job opportunities where you might be eligible for. So again, that has its science and its own techniques on its own, but then that's when you are invited to a job interview or some smaller assignments, depending on the whims of the heads of unit or director generals or the hiring managers. Voila. So how to get this job, what you need to do. And I know that there are a couple other questions coming in, which many of which seem to have been answered. So very good. Thank you so much, Rita and Agi and everyone else who is involved, because this is super helpful that you are even answering questions that I see from the corner of my eyes while I can focus on the presentation itself. How to get the job? Well, there are many things you can do, but first and foremost, it's practice, perseverance, and learning methodology. It's really so important that you regularly practice, yes, just like for sports preparation, but you cannot win any sports competition without the right methodology, the right techniques. And there are techniques for the abstract reasoning, the numerical reasoning, the verbal reasoning, writing a good, effective, clear case study or written exam. And certainly even for the field-related tests, you can practice those. It gives you an idea of the kind of topics that can come up, the kind of things you want to revise, the body of knowledge linked to migration, linked to internal security, linked to crisis management that you want to look at. There are certainly many institutions dealing with these topics. You want to look at their annual reports. You want to look at their formal communication. They want to look at what they put out there on their websites, what sort of resources they make reference to. All of this are helpful sources of information that you want to look through. You want to memorize key facts and pieces of information aside from what you already know. Because you are in this field, there's a good reason you're listening to this webinar. There's a good reason you are interested in this competition. You certainly already know a lot. Be sure that you don't have any blind spots. Be sure that there are no areas that you may not have covered or something you just simply never dealt with or never looked at it from that angle. So if you have experience from the UN or you have experience from certain national administrations, there could be aspects, there could be policy issues that you just simply haven't thought about. So be sure that you check those, and there are fact sheets on these policy areas that you can look up. And these are very helpful resources to shape your preparation, to shape your thinking on what to cover. staying persistent, maybe do a little study group or collect with peers, with colleagues, with others. That is helpful, even if formally speaking, they are competitors, but they can keep up the motivation. You can share great resources with them, and certainly do simulations. So once you are sitting in front of that computer and it's exam time, be sure you're not completely caught off guard as to the interface or what does it look like or what you need to do, your time management, and all the excitement and the pressure that the exam brings. So with that, we are here. We're happy to help. We have resources, the website. We have practice tests, an enormous number. We have verbal reasoning in all 24 official languages of the EU. So that's something we're very proud of, and it's certainly for your disposal to help your preparation. And then we have specific questions on both areas of this particular competition, crisis management, and then migration and internal security as well. So you can use those. And as I said, it helps to give you an idea of what knowledge is required of you. And then we have case studies as well. So you can do that with or without manual or coach-driven evaluations. So it's entirely up to you which option you choose. And we also have workshops, and we're coming up with a new version for the case study methodology webinar. And we have free webinars, we have paid webinars. And as I said, the case study insights is going to be updated in the second half of September. So that's also going to be publicized and made available. So with that, keep an eye out for all these opportunities and resources and all the rest. Dare I say, consider the Ultimate EU Testbook. The latest edition is 2023, and there's a new edition coming at the very end of this year, very early next year, 2024, which is going to have a brand new abstract verbal numerical reasoning test. And it's also going to have an extra number of EU knowledge tests, which is not directly tested in this particular competition. But then again, it gives perhaps a good idea of what the EPSO competitions require. So with that, there's the Facebook group and the special discount offer that I'm going to keep on the screen, and take a look at any other question that may have come in. And I see, presumably there's only one, Agi, if I'm not mistaken. So let me just read this out. What can we expect from the multiple choice questions? So the knowledge in the field, the knowledge part. Speaking for the migration competition, there are currently 10 plus legislative initiatives at different stages of negotiation versus the legislation in force, mainly adopted long ago. So, and legislation that's currently not in force, is it worth studying Commission proposals or the Council's general approach, Parliament opinions? Well, the answer to this is anything that can radically change, like legislation that is currently being negotiated, they're not going to ask in the competition in that form. So they're not going to say, well, this Commission proposal proposes this and this, A, B, C, D, which one is correct? They can't really do that. What if the Parliament and the Council, they pass that legislation while the competition is happening, or there's a massive deluge of amendments and the proposal radically changes? So that's a moving target. So for legal and practical reasons, they just cannot ask those questions. What they can ask is stuff that is well established and legally sound. So legislation that's currently in force, things that are factual, so historic events or certain related to trends or statistics or other things, which again cannot be debated, and stuff that is politically neutral. They do not want to be challenged to say, well, the test question was biased, or the test question favored a certain position other than what the EU's official formal position was. So when you're preparing for this particular competition, focus on facts and focus on information that is neutral and is completely established knowledge, which is not to say that certain things have radically changed, especially in this particular, or in these fields, internal security, migration, crisis management. I mean, if you open any news site, these are the topics that are the most talked about. So this is not to say that only look at historic stuff. So anything that that was adopted relatively recently, but as long as it is neutral and established facts, can be part of the questions that the multiple choice quiz will test you about. With that, any tips to prepare for crisis management? Is it very broad? We focus on EU legislation. I would caution you against focusing just on legislation, right? Like, this is not an exam for lawyers purely, right? So it's broader than that. So look at typically I would suggest you look at fact sheets which summarize a certain policy that is not purely just the legislation, but again, certain best practices, or whether it's the Dublin Convention, or things that go slightly beyond the EU. Certainly there's an EU focus, but what does the UN do? What do other migration policy institutes or organizations do? What are certain key conventions that, or best practice is probably not the word, but certain key terms and concepts and terminology around it can also be subject to be part of the test that you are going to be given. Aside from that, again, look at what the EAS says and does, and they have wonderful reports and very, very solid materials on their website in these particular fields, and say, what is the common position on one matter? What is the approach? What is the methodology in those fields? Right, I see that there's one or two questions still coming in on specific experience or studies or other, but again, I'm not gonna go into any particular detail. We're very happy to help you to the degree we can, so to guide you or point you to the right resource, or just give you our take on one matter. But as I said before, when it comes to your very particular, unique personal situation, with your degree, with your work experience, well, we can give you some ideas and pointers, but we're not going to be the formal, official, ultimate source or authority to decide on that. So you might want to ask the selection board or EPSO's contact center for those issues. Right, do supporting documents need to contain? Okay, anyways, I'm just looking from the corner of my eye what else is there. But in any case, we are nearing the end of our 1 hour self-imposed timeline. And I'd like to encourage you that if there are other questions that I may not have touched upon, or something that I may have missed, please feel free to send those our way. And my colleagues or myself will be very happy to help you and share all the knowledge that we have gained, the knowledge that we have in this particular field, to help you succeed, help you pass the different steps in this competition. So with that, I'm going to conclude with a big thanks to Rita, to Agi, to Balázs, to Zsófi, to everyone in the team who helped and made this a reality, today's webinar. Appreciate everyone's time, appreciate everyone's attention. Thank you so much. Feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help. We're here to provide resources. And if you have suggestions and comments or feedback, we are also listening and would like to provide you the best possible tools that are out there. So feel free to let us know. We would very much appreciate that. So with that, have a wonderful summer and enjoy August. Hopefully that gives you enough energy to come back and start practicing for these tests. Bear in mind that this is a competition for good reason, and the word really means that there's a fierce competition for the number of places that we've shared. So you need to be among the top candidates, and that requires a serious preparation and dedication to the exam itself. So with that, thanks again, and have a nice time. To be continued in a couple of weeks.